So welcome everyone. My name is Leon Barnard. My colleague Billy Carlson is also here to help out as well. We both work at Balsamiq. And today I'm going to be talking about using templates in your design process when using wireframes. So before we get started, we are recording this webinar. And if you use the chat feature, your name might be displayed, but everybody's microphones and videos are off, so there won't be any other information about you. In the Q&A session at the end, I think there will be an ability to ask questions anonymously. Otherwise, if you're comfortable with sharing your name, you can do that in the chat or in the Q&A later. If you don't want to share any of your personal information, you can email me afterwards at learn@balsamiq.com with any questions or any follow-up questions or things you want to talk about. So you can use email after the webinar as well. And yes, we're recording this, and then we're going to be sharing this on our YouTube channel later for other people to watch. And I think that's it for the kind of the privacy stuff. And yes, if you have questions while I'm speaking, I might not get to them, but you can ask in the chat, and Billy will do his best to respond, and then we'll review them at the end. So what are we going to be talking about today? I'll start by talking about what templates are, just to kind of get on the same page about everything, and then why use them, and then get into this process for using templates in your wireframing, and then we'll have some time for some questions at the end. And you can connect with me on Twitter I'm at Leon Barnard, and then you can email our education team at any time by emailing learn@balsamiq.com. So let's get started, talk about what templates are, and then also clarify some terminology. Templates is a very overloaded term, so I want to kind of explain what I mean when I use that term. But first, let's imagine that you run a restaurant. Your job is to feed your customers. You use ingredients across dishes. There can be multiple things that you can have tomatoes in a salad. You can put tomatoes in pasta, etc. And then you might mix and match these dishes across various meals, so that you can have a complete meal or dictate the food based on people's preferences. And then of course, you also want it to be repeatable across multiple customers. You want them to get two different people order the same thing. You want it to taste and look the same, and then across time as well. So, from one week to another, if the same person comes back, you want kind of a consistent experience. So that takes a lot of work, not only to make great food, but to make it repeatable. And a lot of things like that. And so that's kind of where your recipes come in, is that you write these things down rather than just kind of making it up on the spot every day. So now switching over to websites, apps, etc. So this is how a user sees a website. They see, this Nike shopping website. They see a bunch of different pages like this one, and they navigate it just as a series of pages. Just the way that a customer of a restaurant is just eating their meal. But if we kind of strip away some of that stuff and take it to a more abstract level, this is how the designer and also the developer sees it. Maybe they're not as concerned with all of the specific content for each page, because somebody is not coding or designing every single different page from scratch. So if I'm looking at a gray hoodie or a black hoodie, those are just variations on the same page. And all of that content is coming from a database somewhere. So those images, even the descriptions, the names of the items, maybe what sizes there are, whether they're available, those sorts of things, that's all getting populated from a database. And so that's why you don't really need to necessarily be worried about designing or coding every page, as if it's unique. And so focusing a little bit more on some of the different items on the page. So I've highlighted some of the controls or also called components. Another way to look at these is as containers for that data or information that might come from a database. So, one type of component might be the navigation bar at the top. Links are, one of the most basic types of controls. Various other kinds of navigation, images or an image gallery, even text itself is a type of control, that has some formatting rules, and it has some impact or some use for the user. And then if we kind of go one level above that, above the controls, then you have groups of controls, which can also be called patterns. So you might have a header pattern, which has your navigation in it, but also the logo, some information about how to contact, maybe the search, your, banner, which might contain sub-navigation, an image grid, which is multiple images and maybe some navigation, maybe a call to action kind of widget that allows you to say, maybe add to cart or favorite it or share it, something like that. So these are examples of what is often referred to as patterns, which again are groups of controls. And then if we go to a different page, you can't just use this one layout for all of the pages. So, if I want to browse, say, the bestsellers or within a certain, all the shoes or something, then that's where this idea of a template comes in. And so when I talk about templates, a template, what I mean is a page template. And so you might have different page templates for one site. Even if you have dozens or even hundreds of pages, maybe you have 3 or 4 or 5 unique templates. That's all. Maybe you have the individual product page, you have the product listing page, maybe you have something separate for the home page or the landing page that's more designed to kind of like bring people in, get them excited about the product. And this doesn't have to just be a website or an e-commerce site. This is true for mobile apps, desktop apps, websites, everything. So again, if we go back to this analogy of, the restaurant owner, the ingredients, those are the controls, or also called components. The dishes, which are the groups of controls, can be called patterns. And then the template, that's kind of like the whole meal where you combine all those things together in one cohesive thing, and then you can have different meals, which are different combinations of those controls and patterns. So why do we use these? Well, you can probably imagine a lot of reasons why we might, but let's just kind of go into these in a little bit more detail. Some of you might have heard about design systems, depending on what industry you work in and what your role is, but really they've really taken over in popularity. They're everywhere now. Every company seems to have their own design system. A design system is basically, it's a library of patterns and components. Everybody's using them for a lot of different reasons. Yeah, design systems are basically a way to categorize and, kind of have a repository of your own patterns, components, and sometimes even templates. So the first reason why you want to have a design library, or you want to use templates, patterns, components, is for consistency. It's for a better user experience for the user. So say that I go to this website and I'm browsing their clothing. So it takes me a little while to kind of figure out how this site works, even if it's on a subconscious level. So if I am looking at a shirt and then and then I go and look at a pair of shorts, the way that I browse the photos of the garment, as well as, the color chooser and the size selector, that's all the same. They're all in the same place. So that means that I'm not thinking about the website. I'm thinking about, do I like this color? Do I like these clothes? I can focus on what I want to focus on, which is, I need some new clothes for summer or whatever. And so that's really a much better user experience than me having to figure out how to use the website. And another reason is that, most apps, most software that you build these days is going to be made up of things that there's already a design pattern for. So you can, even if you don't have your own design system, you can refer to others, or you can import one like Bootstrap is a popular one. So if you're creating a navigation control, you don't necessarily have to, invent it from scratch. Even if you're going to be designing it and coding it yourself, you can look at examples and to learn best practices and have all these best practices built into it for forms, buttons, navigation. I'm going to show an example. So if I want to build a checkout form or any kind of form for having an address, I can just look, there's examples out there. I shouldn't have to design a checkout workflow as if I've never seen one before, because lots and lots of them already exist. So let me go back to my slides. So another reason is that programmers love them, for good reason. So this is an example. This is from our website, our Balsamiq Learn website. It's a list of our courses, and this is what the code for that page looks like. This is the entirety of the code. It's not a lot of text, because what it does is it says, okay, bring in the header, bring in the navigation, bring in let me type in the title, and now bring in this data for the courses that are in this folder. So if a programmer wants to make any updates to it, fix something, it's very easy to do, because you do it in one place and it fixes everything everywhere. And it's true for the designer too. They can be thinking about designing, they're thinking about designing at the page level or the component level. This page even, it not only it uses a template for the page, but each of those course kind of widgets or cards is a component as well. So it's kind of inception of a reusable object inside of another reusable object. If you've ever worked with WordPress before or something like that, you're probably familiar with having separate header and footer files, or maybe for the navigation as well. And a last reason to use templates is for inspiration. So here's an example, something that Billy did a while ago. So this is a screenshot from Apple Music. And there's a whole demo of this, but Billy took this Apple Music design and said, well, what if I wanted to create a mobile app for my restaurant? I can kind of borrow a lot of the ideas from this well-designed template and patterns and apply them to a totally different context. So Billy did a webinar recently, actually, called Copying to Learn, where he talks about this a little bit. And there's also a good article we have that shows some examples. But basically, there's a lot of great work that people have already done on designing things that you can borrow from. And that's kind of the gist of why templates, patterns, components are really, really useful, really, really popular. So now let's dive into a little bit about what the process of using this idea and these frameworks for designing looks like. So it's actually a multi-step process. It's not just as simple as putting these templates together. I like to think of it in terms of 3 separate steps. So the first step is exploration, then refinement, and then integration. I borrowed this diagram at the bottom from another article recently. A lot of people use something like this to describe the design process, where it starts very messy in the beginning, and then it kind of gets to this semi-structured, slightly refined state, and then before moving on to a new state where it's just kind of a lot more straightforward, a lot more organized, not quite so messy. And so the reason that I'm mentioning that is that I think that the messiness should remain part of it. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about why that is. But in the refinement step, the second step, that's where I recommend introducing components and patterns. And then in that last step, integration, that's where I recommend introducing templates. So I'm going to describe why and how. So in theory, it could work like this. So let's say you have a pattern library. Maybe you have it in your wireframe library as well, which can be really great. In theory, you could just kind of drag and drop all of these components, and boom, you've designed your web page really easy. And that actually can work in certain scenarios where if you have a really well-established pattern library and an existing product, say you're designing a new screen that's basically very similar to a previous one or something like that, then sometimes you can go in and it's a lot of just dragging and dropping and copying what you have already. But I found in a lot of cases, especially if it's a new product or if it's a new idea, it's not quite that straightforward. It might actually stifle your creativity a little bit because you feel constrained by what already exists. So I recommend doing a little bit of more work upfront first and not just diving into using your templates and your patterns right away. So here is a wireframing session that I did recently. And the reason that I want to show it is because I want to show that you don't necessarily want to, I want to show why you don't want to use these right away. So I'm just going to pause for a second for a little bit of context. So this is kind of in the middle of a wireframing session. And the reason I'm showing this is because what I'm doing here is really just kind of exploring concepts. I'm not thinking too much about reusability. You could see some just shapes with colors in it. It doesn't look like a final product. This is not something that I would hand off to a developer to build. And so what I wanted to do is just show a minute or two of the process of kind of live wireframing on the spot when you don't really know what the UI is going to be yet. So I just want to spend a minute seeing kind of what that looks like. And I'm talking to somebody else here on this. A lot of interactivity here. Let's show this so that we can indicate that maybe this is laid out if they haven't, if they don't select this, but this might have their location, something like that. Whatever the other filter is this, give me your thoughts so far.
Yeah, I think you're, it's definitely tracking where I was kind of envisaging. It's hard, you being the UI person you are, you can visualize it or represent it. I kind of know, but I don't know how to actually. But this is matching up with what my thoughts were, I guess.
Okay, great. Okay, so we can go through the next phase of refinement, because obviously it's not really going to look anything like this, but we've at least identified what things are most important, what things are most prominent, and having an understanding of the priority and also what things you cannot include is a really good start when you're doing UI design, like what things really need to be there and at what level of importance. All right, so I'll pause that, and I want to emphasize that last bit where I kind of summarized where we are at in the process. I would say what I was trying to do in this, what I would call the exploration phase, is really get the idea out of this person's head and onto the page. So that's really the first step in designing. So I'm working with somebody who really understands the problem that they want to solve and wants help building a design for it. And so I'm not just going to say, okay, I get it, and then just, build the design for them. I'm going to work with them and kind of flesh things out as we go and kind of like, does this look okay? What do you think about this? And it's really about getting those ideas onto the page. And then, like I said, figuring out what things are most important, and then maybe using the UI to kind of reflect that, as far as you making things bigger, the order of things, where things go, that sort of thing. So I feel like it's really important, no matter what you're building, to do that process, especially if it's a new idea. And so that's, I'm not really thinking about any kind of templates or components at this point. So for the next video, I'm going to jump around a little bit. So this is a different live wireframing session. And in this case, the people I worked with had really done a lot of work to create a sitemap for this app that they wanted to build in advance. So they had a lot of documentation showing how the pieces might fit together. And we'd already done a lot of talking about it and already done a fair amount of the UI design. So I'm going to jump in kind of the middle, and then I'll explain why or what I'm talking about.
Ingredients, or they can search by recipes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And maybe it will. So this is what we call the recipe page, which is one page on the start auto-filling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
All right, not bad. Let's try another screen. So I'll just pause again. Sorry, and I'm just really, I started here because I feel like what that represents is kind of the end of the exploration process. For, you can see on the left there's a kind of an overview screen, and then this list screen. So now I'm going back to the sitemap to think about what to do next. What do you think, vendors? Since that's...
Yeah, I was thinking vendors.
Okay, so vendors. So what are they looking for when they're looking for a vendor? Why are they interested in the vendors?
So I think usually they're going to be, because they want to find nearby vendors where they can buy from, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So we were thinking we were thinking it would really just be a map of all vendors, and then they can like click on one that they're specifically interested in, but we didn't want to limit to that if ever. So we're not sure how it'll look, but basically those are the two things that they want from the vendors, is either a specific vendor profile. They already know that they like that vendor, or maybe they went once and they want more information.
Mm-hmm.
They have the vendor profile, and then they have like an overview of all the vendors who are nearby.
Well, and the reason this is important for the seasonal is because there are several vendors like farmers markets, and because the app is dedicated to trying to help some of the smaller vendors get attention, they're not open all the time. So most of the time they'd be going to see when they're open.
For the farmers markets, yeah.
For the farmers markets, or even the other vendor, like, is Chez Robin still open? It's, because here depanneurs are open until 10 o'clock at night. Is this local grocery store open, or do I have to go to the big box one?
So is that something they might want to filter?
By the time, oh yeah, actually by that's a good point.
Okay, let's maybe try this using a variation on the same layout. Call this vendors, but
That's gonna be time.
So I'll pause here, and some things I want to point out is that I don't know if you noticed, but this recipes page and the vendors page were both at the same level in the hierarchy. So they were both children of the same top level object. So that already gives me an idea that maybe these might have a similar template. And then I listened a little bit to try to learn a little bit more about what this vendors page might look like. And I heard enough to make me think that there would be some ability to repeat some of those UI patterns. And so instead of starting this page from scratch, what I did is just duplicated the existing page, the recipes page, and now I'm going to see if I can go through the process of using as much of this page as possible for this new vendors page, knowing that some of it might be different, but I'm kind of starting with this template first or pattern first mentality of, rather than starting from scratch, let's assume that these pages are going to be the same, and let's see if we can try to fit them into it. And maybe at the end it won't work, but it seems like it's at least worth investigating a little bit. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit where I talk a little bit more about templates, more about page templates. Let's see, right about here, I think. Problem, it's just visually making it. So this is kind of skipping ahead to the end of the vendor's design. And I'll show you the pages more closely later, but they're are several differences, but there are also some similarities, making it nice and clean. So, so yeah, something like that.
Yep.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Yep.
I can actually see them going through.
All right, let's see if we can try one more page, because so far we've done the like list pages. So we have two templates so far. One is the top level. One is one level down from that when you've gone from the top level to one level down, and then we can try one more template where you're going into the individual single item view, you could say. And you know what, let's just because we need to remind ourselves that somehow they need to get around, let's just throw in one of these kind of default hamburger menu navigation things. So somehow when you click on this, yeah, you actually, that's a good place to do the log out too. And somehow when they click on this, they're going to get a menu that allows them to
go to other, awesome, that's good.
Or whatever. So let's see, they've chosen either a recipe or a vendor or a product. I'm thinking that what we're going to want there is like the first thing they're going to want to, or that we want to see here is a photo. So let's get rid of these. And this is going to be this, and then we're going to do so I'll pause here to show. So now I'm creating a new template, and because I'm already in this kind of template-based mentality, instead of just jumping into, oh, I'm going to create, you know, the detailed view for vendors, I'm already thinking about, oh, I can reuse this template across the product, vendor, and recipe category. So that's why I use that label at the top to indicate I'm not just designing one page. I have in mind to design one template that can be used for at least 3 different types of pages. So it's kind of like it was this slow progression from exploring and creating the home page, and then when I got into the list page and then created a different page that was at the same level in the hierarchy, I realized, oh, maybe I can reuse some of these things, and that's already in my head. And now that I'm creating another page, another new page, I'm thinking, oh, well, this can definitely be a template that can be used across multiple categories. Big photo. And then hopefully this page will be a little bit easier, because I think it's just not going to have as much. It's going to be more like a, you know, a document. I'm thinking it will involve a lot of text, so describing it, and maybe an area of with some basic information. So in the case of, yeah, so you can kind of hear my thinking behind it. And then I'm just going to jump ahead to one part at the end where I'm just trying to kind of reflect back this process to the people that I was working with, and then also indicate kind of how we got to that part. So this will be the last part of this video. Run with that.
Yeah, for sure.
And maybe that's an okay place to stop.
Yep, yeah, that's perfect.
Great. Well, as you can see, having this sitemap really, or all the work you did on those spreadsheets led to the sitemap, which then allowed us to build the UI. Sorry, I apologize. My internet connection for this recording was bad. So my current connection is not bad, but that's actually the way the recording is. I feel like we went through the process in the right way. So kind of building from the high level, who's using it, what are they using it for? Okay, let's start to visualize how all those activities and goals might be related to each other. And now let's see if we can actually build an interface that that reflects all of those. So I think that the way that this process has gone, I mean, you know, you could kind of see that doing the UI was actually fairly easy once we had all this stuff, you know, and just having a little bit of UI design experience, like I'm able to look at this sitemap and say, okay, you know, really kind of easily visualize, like it came to my head right away. And I don't know if this is necessarily the best way, for example, you know, but that being able to see this made the UI design much easier.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So
Well, we really enjoyed doing all of the
all right, so that's
Search by ingredients, or they can search by recipes.
okay. So now I'm going to jump to a little demo, not showing really UI design, but how I would approach going through this process now. Especially, I would do it maybe a little bit differently now that I've had time to think about it. And I really want to focus on importing templates that we have provided to help you in this process. So I'm going to switch over to Balsamiq Cloud, our web application, and show you kind of how I would set up a project for doing this kind of template-based and pattern-based workflow. So here's Balsamiq Cloud. And actually, let me show you those, some of the wireframes from that earlier project. This is that sitemap. I was looking at the recipes page and the vendors page. And then lastly, a little bit on the product page, which was a child of products. So you can see these three all exist at the same level. So that's kind of what gave me that initial idea. Here's that homepage template, the recipes template, which shares a lot in common with the vendors template. In reality, I don't know if these would end up being the exact same templates. Maybe it wouldn't work, maybe it would, because you can have slight variations on templates. And then here's that kind of generic list page, which I felt like could be applied across multiple. Okay, so now I'm going to show how I would use our Wireframes to Go site to start with these kind of refinement and integration steps that I mentioned earlier. So say, assuming that I already have done the exploration, and maybe I could even do this in advance before I do it, just to have them ready. So if you open the UI control library and I go to more controls, it will bring up our Wireframes to Go library. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a few that I would recommend adding, and then I'll show how to use them. This one is called Wireflow Elements, and what these are kind of like little thumbnail page templates. So it's just little pictures of all the different types of templates there are out there. So you might have a search page or an error page, a company page, a landing page. This just shows you basically, you know, all of these templates could basically be used to design any website imaginable. This covers probably 90% of all of the templates that are used on the web right now. So it helps you think about, well, what are the different types of templates, especially if you come in without having a lot of different experience. And then I'm going to bring in a couple of patterns that Billy created for his article on designing for tools like Squarespace and these site builder tools. And so this is something I showed earlier where you have kind of these pre-built web templates. And then there's another one that shows the patterns rather than the templates itself, these different types of content blocks, like kind of your call to action, your hero widget, your list and card widgets. So I want to bring this into the project too. And then I also want to point out a couple of new templates that we've added recently that are basically copies of specific applications that are really popular. So, you know, here's one for Airbnb. It's called kind of a generic housing rental site. So this is, you know, the Airbnb, kind of a generic version of the Airbnb homepage and the search page. And then here's the kind of the detail page. There's another one for TikTok, for example, if you kind of are doing, you know, kind of a more modern mobile app. So I'll bring that in too. And so now, not only do I have kind of all of these template suggestions here for, again, not in the early stages, but once I've done that exploration and I'm ready to start thinking about, okay, what are some components, some widgets that I can start using, and so instead of just trying to design these things from scratch, I'm kind of looking at existing ones and saying, oh, I like this layout of the big picture and the other ones, and then kind of a showing all, or I want to do a kind of a checkout workflow, let me grab this widget. And then there's all these other ones that I've imported. So for example, here's the Wireflow one. So maybe I know that I want to go from an article to a blog post, and then I'm going to have my shopping cart checkout widget or whatever, and maybe I'll draw some arrows between those. And so before I'm ready to really get into the nitty gritty, this is maybe an alternative to a sitemap and a way to say, okay, this is what my flow is going to be like. And so I'm already thinking about those things, and then I can look at, well, look at all these components that I can use for things. So I want a hashtag, widget, or I want, a profile button thing, or I like these little arrows. And then so you're building, using these controls, and it's easier to build your site or app by reusing these existing components, from these template libraries. So to recap, don't reinvent the wheel, use components. And when you're thinking about templates and patterns, the way to know when you're ready is when you start to see repeating layouts. When you start to kind of feel like, oh, didn't I design this page already? That's when you know, oh, maybe this is a time for a pattern or a template. And so, then you can start consolidating. But don't jump into that too soon. You want to spend time exploring first. Let these templates, these patterns kind of emerge out of your ideas that come from focusing on the problem and the user. And here are a bunch of articles which I will add to the webpage when it goes up, where a lot of this information comes from, and just for kind of deeper exploration about that as well. And now we'll move on to some Q&A. Again, you can contact me, connect with me on Twitter, or email us as well.